Hi, and thank you so much for popping by. My name is Dr. Bita Balozi. Feel free to call me Dr. Balozi or Dr. Bowie. On my mind today are two terms. One is social procurement, and the other one is tenderpreneuring. Now, according to literature or studies that I've been reading, tenderpreneuring typically benefits the ones in power, it typically benefits the syndicates, it typically benefits those who are in these cartels, right? On the other hand, social procurement, this is the more deliberate and intentional strategy to say, you know what? We need to equalize these skills. Now we need to make sure that not only are the tenderpreneurs being awarded tenders, but we need to ensure that these tenders also benefit those who are not in power or those who are not corrupt. Essentially, at the beginning, the idea was to make sure that the tendering process is equalized, that it is not only benefiting one group, but it is also benefiting the rest of the population, right? But unfortunately, as we all know now, that the tendering process or the tenderpreneurship process has now been corrupted to the point where only a very few people with very strong political ties are benefiting from this system. And that is why you find researchers are now advocating for this concept of social procurement, because juxtaposed to tenderpreneuring, social procurement is saying we need more deliberate and intentional strategies in order to make sure that the tenderpreneuring process also benefits those that may not be politically affiliated, that this process also benefits those that are not in power or those who are not part of the syndicates and these corrupt cartels, right? So that is why these two terms are being discussed today. So what I think is interesting about the study that I'm reading here, that was actually written by Botswana, who are working at the University of Botswana, or who were working at the University of Botswana when the study was published, which is 2019, a very recent study, is that they are describing the word tenderpreneurship as a cancer. Tenderpreneuring is generally used to describe somebody masquerading as a legitimate business person using political contacts to secure lucrative government contracts, irrespective of whether they have been tendered for or not. Very loaded statement, right? A very, very loaded statement. In context to Botswana specifically, the tenderpreneuring process has become such that it is a business in and of itself for those who are corrupt. Bwana reyoi is another phrase that is used to say, you know, you need to talk and negotiate with this particular person if you want to get out of this predicament. Essentially, all of these phrases are really speaking to the terminology that you are likely to hear when now the process becomes corrupted, right? So in other words, corruption is not just happening at the top offices, it is also happening on the implementation level at the government and private sector sometimes, right? So you will hear words like diga sengwe, diga something. And then you will hear the word waring ukare ga o monna jana, dira kana diga sengwe. And as I said, this term ekare ga o monna jana is actually in reference to the fact that typically tenderpreneurs are male, right? That's what this research is showing. So that is why ekare there is this particular reference to a man, because unfortunately the tender process or the tenderpreneuring process is definitely at the preserve of the man. So all the above phrases are all intended to obtain money from clients or the general public through unscrupulous means. Ultimately, the perpetrators of this practice find an opportunity, an entrepreneurial opportunity within these bribes that are solicited from clients on a daily basis during office hours. Now, can you imagine if you don't have this additional 2,000 pula or ha papa a kgona go diga sengwenyana, kana ha papa a kgona go taka two, it means that you're going to lose out. So the practice eventually becomes a culture of the department in question before it afflicts the entire organization or the ministry. In the long run, the practice may spread to other organizations and ultimately become the culture of a nation and country to pay bribes before being provided with service. Tenderpreneuring, according to this literature, also implies a lack of accountability on the part of the agents and their principals. And for as long as the formula for sharing the proceeds of their crime is strictly adhered to, then it will continue as a culture. So as long as we, the people, are also willing to continue to pay these bribes, then we are implicit. We can't nurture the corruption and then complain about it. So it's very important that, as you can see from this research, if we don't say anything, then we are part of the culture. Okay. According to this literature, the definition of tenderpreneuring indicates that agents, be it from the private sector companies or the government officials acting on behalf of principals, being the general public or the shareholders, behave inappropriately by colluding with members of their syndicates to contravene corporate or official bidding tendering processes. So the word syndicates is very key here, meaning it's a very strong culture. And as I'm thinking of syndicates, I'm thinking of the cartels that are being reported in the 4 institutions we were talking about before that are identified as highly corrupt, right? So this is what they mean when they say tenderpreneurship is now becoming a cancer in the context of Botswana, which is not a good thing. Another study which is saying that, procurement is increasingly used as a strategic tool to mitigate social issues such as social exclusion and unemployment of marginalized groups, which is what the tenderpreneuring process was initially meant to do. It was meant to equalize the scale so that the locals or those who have been left behind can also be included in the economic development of the country, right? And by conducting social procurement and imposing so-called employment requirements, organizations can create job opportunities for marginalized people. Private and public actors are increasingly using their purchasing power to mitigate social issues such as fiscal constraints, mass migration and segregation, and to create social value through their procurement process. This process, known as social procurement, includes measures like health and safety, buying from local women or minority-owned enterprises, and creating employment for disadvantaged groups, right? So as soon as I say that, you can see how when you juxtapose social procurement to tenderpreneuring, you can see where the loopholes of tenderpreneuring are and why we need deliberate and intentional strategies such as social procurement to mitigate this particular tenderpreneuring process. So social procurement, this is how they define it. When we focus on the best value for money, procurement is much more than a financial transaction. It is a tool for building healthy communities. So social procurement observes that every purchase has a social, economic, cultural, and environmental impact. Social procurement is about using your existing purchasing to capture those impacts to achieve overarching institutional, governmental, or individual goals that help shape inclusive, vibrant, and healthy communities. So what are the consequences of tenderpreneuring? Tenderpreneuring has possible dire consequences on several forms. First, tenderpreneuring may potentially rob the general public of financial resources, of course. Tenderpreneurs' cost of the project is generally not based on the actual cost of delivering the projects plus markups, but rather on the amount of money that the tenderpreneur and his syndicate or cartel are willing to siphon out of government coffers. At best, this is a scheme devised by the syndicate to steal from the public. Institutionalized corruption, right? And this is why I was talking in a previous clip that it would seem that we do too much effort. We apply too much effort in protecting the corrupt. We apply too much effort in protecting the syndicates and the cartels at the expense of the ordinary Motswana. The effort that has been applied to maintain these syndicates, to maintain these cartels, the same level of effort must be used to change that culture, must be used to empower those that are at the bottom. These findings may also highlight the need to strengthen internal control mechanisms pertaining to tendering processes and the need to ensure that best practice corporate governance is adhered to at all times in the conduct of corporate transactions at both the private sector and governmental organizations. The paper may also conscientize policymakers, decision makers of the need to safeguard scarce public resources which are possibly looted by tenderpreneurs and their accomplices, both in the private sector and the governmental organizations, specifically in these developing countries. In addition, the findings from this paper may possibly generate debates regarding tendering. So you can see how, in contrast or juxtaposed to tenderpreneuring, the idea of social procurement is saying, let us not incentivize those who are already powerful and corrupt sometimes. Let us now incentivize those who are at the bottom of the food chain, those who are at the bottom, right? That is the idea of making sure that we use a deliberate and intentional strategy such as social procurement versus the tenderpreneuring system, which has obviously benefited those in the syndicates, those in the cartels that have continued to make this process of tenderpreneuring highly corrupt, right? Alrighty, my friend, I thank you so much for popping by. I hope you're having a lovely day where you are, but most importantly, I hope you're having a healthy day wherever you're watching me from. Bye.